Today, I'm going to try to draw this wild-looking stairway thing in Viatolid's Bane, and already I'm getting more ambitious with my references, apparently, so I must be warming up. This is very much not something I would typically go for, and when I have in the past, it tends to look like I typically don't. So sit back and relax or whatever, and watch this surprisingly come together a whole lot better than I expected. But before that, make sure you're subscribed to the channel, as the vast majority of you are not. Also, if you ever have any drawing tips or suggestions for me, don't be afraid to leave them in the comments. And if you end up liking this video, go ahead and like it. I would love that. So, there were a few ways I could have started this, and I kind of chose every single one of them. At first, I wanted to work from the top of these steps and then just run all the way down, maintaining as much detail as possible. But as I was doing that, I realized how quickly I could lose track of the perspective, which is, noticeably dramatic in the reference. So I shifted to the wooden railing thing because I think it's the clearest example of that perspective illusion. Then I felt like I didn't have much to anchor myself to, so I went back and drew some more steps, but without the detail. And I think I go through this cycle another few times throughout the rest of the drawing. There's really not any rhyme or reason. I just went with what felt best in the moment. At some point, I might have wanted to draw an area of steps, but didn't feel like I knew exactly where they were meant to be in the frame. So I would go back to building out the railing so I had some clearer markers, like the anchor that I mentioned. Ultimately, all the disparate parts do come together to help each other out. So I'm not sure how I would have done this any other way without sacrificing something. For instance, had I started from the top and just diligently worked my way down the stairway, focusing on small details, I think the whole thing would have looked pretty awkward in perspective and proportion terms. And there's a good chance a big chunk of it would have been cut off at the bottom, which is something I really wanted to avoid. And that leads to this foreshortening concept we've talked about in the past. If you take a look at the steps up top and compare them to these in the foreground, you'll notice that they're obviously a lot smaller, and the steps themselves appear much closer together. But when you take in the entire image, proportionally, the space that the bottom 3 steps in the foreground take up is larger than the rest of the steps combined in 2 dimensions. So had I started at the top, there's a good chance my brain would have ignored that illusion, and I'd have 20 or so equally sized and equally spaced out steps. Thankfully, I recognized that straight away, which is why I made such an effort to, approach the scene more holistically. Beyond perspective and proportion, this clearly has a substantial amount of texture. Did you notice? I'm sure you did. There's foliage everywhere, the railings are all gnarled and twisted, and even the steps are, roughly hewn, which means there's not really a straight line to be found, save for the little bench on the right. But I try to ignore that for the most part. So yeah, this highly textural scene gives me a lot of freedom on one hand, but it demands a lot of observational awareness and caution on the other. What I mean by that is this. I'm free to kind of explore the drawing as it comes, because nothing here should be perfect. I can move around all I want, I can make a bit of a mess, and I don't have to concern myself with even a handful of crisp lines. It's just not really relevant here. But within that explorative mess, I still have to find the right lines. This could easily turn out to be totally incoherent or illegible, or whatever word you use to describe an image, indistinguishable, whatever. Anyway, the way I approached this was to keep things really simple while I figured out what those important marks were, while I was going through the perspective and all that, and then add layers of texture on top. So I wanted to make the steps these rough and rocky slabs with dirt and grass all around them, but I also wanted to be careful not to get lost in the dirt and grass and whatnot. The texture could easily have taken over completely, possibly even hiding the steps underneath, which is clearly not how the reference looks, and I did not want that at all. Speaking of texture, The foliage that frames the stairway, everything outside of the railings, was admittedly not a huge concern for me. I know it's an important factor, conveying the setting and all that, but more and more, I'm trying to treat these as practices and not final products as much. And I say that because while it would surely be a productive use of my time to draw trees over and over again, there's only so much I can do with the time allotted. And these steps and railings are already so outside of my comfort zone that I wanted to give them all the attention that they deserve, even if that means this doesn't turn into a complete picture or landscape. I'm just not going for that. Sometimes I find that they're really fun, but it's just not always in the cards, and I'm glad I mostly avoided that today. Relinquishing myself from the pressure of the context meant that I could give all of my focus to what I found most perplexing, and I think that was the best use of today's time. So yeah, I think this turned out pretty good, even though it was, something of a Hail Mary type of drawing. I did not expect it to go this well. And actually, all I could think of was my drawing from the coastal path in Greece. So I'm really glad this went in a different direction. Check out that video if you haven't already. That drawing's not very good. Also, even though I tend to loathe drawing stairs, I didn't mind it today. And maybe that's because of how crooked and crazy they are. Who knows? Doesn't matter. Anyway, let me know what you think of the final drawing. Share this video with someone you think might like it. Stick around for the next one where I draw something you couldn't begin to imagine, probably. I appreciate you for taking the time to watch this one, and I'll see you soon. Thanks.